Captives of a Concept, Chapter 12, entitled, What They Say Is Not What They Always Do. To begin with, we're going to look at a quote from the February 15, 1988 Watchtower, page 4. Quote, "What does it mean to be honest? To be honest means to be truthful. Honesty requires you to be straightforward, not deceptive or misleading. Reasonably, only truthful men qualify to represent God." End quote. Is this the case with the governing body? Well, there's a big difference between making a mistake and being dishonest, and we're going to make that pretty evident in this chapter. Because if the men of the governing body are truthful and straightforward and not deceptive or misleading, they simply have to acknowledge C.T. Russell's false prophecy. But in order to uphold their illusion of God's organization, the governing body cannot always be honest. And in the following example, they not only do not tell Jehovah's Witnesses that Russell's prophecy about 1914 was false, they mislead them to believe that it came true. This example comes from the World magazine, published August 30th, 1914. Now, on page 60 of the Proclaimers book, that is, Jehovah's Witnesses, Proclaimers of God's Kingdom, in this book on page 60, it has a little insert, and it correctly quotes from this World magazine. And I'll show you a picture of this magazine. But this was from a worldly source, a non-Watchtower source. But the governing body quotes from it to give the impression that even a worldly magazine recognized that C.T. Russell's prophecy did came true. And they quoted from this same worldly article and a number of other articles as well. But the governing body must know, or they should know, that the magazine was mistaken. Russell's prophecy, he did not prophesy the beginning of a world war in Europe in 1914. In fact, what did C.T. Russell prophesy? Well, on page 226 of the July 15, 1894 Watchtower, Charles Taze Russell said this, quote, "Bear in mind that the end of 1914 is not the date for the beginning, but the end of the time of trouble." So what happened in 1914 was exactly the opposite of what Russell had foretold. So it's obvious then that none of this happened in 1914. But on the book, The Time Is at Hand, printed in 1889, on page 99 it says this, quote, "Within the coming 26 years, all present governments will be overthrown and dissolved. We consider it an established truth that the final end of the kingdoms of this world will be accomplished by the end of AD 1914. End quote. So not one kingdom came to its end. So why would the governing body ever want anyone to refer to this article, which proves that Russell's prophecy didn't come true? Well, they knew, whoever was writing this article, they had two choices. They had to either admit it was false or figure out a way to prevent the reader from noticing that it was false. And which route does Watchtower take? They don't admit it's false. They're going to mislead the reader. So again, the little insert in the Proclaimer's book doesn't mention the title of that article. But it's interesting, on page 17 of the October 8th, 1973 Awake, they do show the page from the World magazine. But they do something very dishonest. And here's the picture I'll show you. They cut the title off. Yeah, let's go back. Remember, the title was The End of All Kingdoms in 1914, and now they cut that off, and now the title looks like it's Millennial Dawner's 25-year prophecy. So to the untrained Jehovah's Witness eye, it looks like Charles Taze Russell's prophecies all came true regarding 1914. So the Jehovah's Witnesses, they have no idea that they're being misled by the men that they trust the most. Why is that? How come they have no idea? They have no clue they're being misled? Well, because there's strict warnings not to think beyond what the governing body tells them to think. Because if they do, well, they're labeled as being independent. Independent thinking is strongly warned against, especially when it comes to God and or His organization. And so that's their thinking process. And this error in thinking apparently convinces Jehovah's Witnesses that God doesn't mind if they are less than honest, in order to convince those who listen to them that Russell was a true prophet and what he said came true. What's the point? Again, it's one thing to make a mistake. It's something totally different when you try to cover up your mistakes by being dishonest. So as long as the Jehovah's Witnesses choose to believe the lie, they will be unable to be honest about they will be unable to be honest about the organization's history as it relates to this lie. Another example is here in the June 1st, 1997 Watchtower, where they state that the society does not do any of the following. Quote, question, why can we have the utmost confidence in the faithful and discreet slave? Answer, modesty on the part of the faithful, discreet slave class prevents it from presumptuously running ahead and wildly speculating about things. The slave class strives to avoid being dogmatic. Never should we become impatient with Jehovah's organization indiscreetly trying to run ahead of God. How reassuring it is to know that the channel Jehovah is using does not do so. It is both faithful and discreet. End quote. This statement is not only deceptive and misleading, it's just an outright false statement. It's a lie. The governing body does presumptuously run ahead. It does wildly speculate about things, and it is overly dogmatic. It is indiscreet. The next example of dishonesty on the hands of the governing body is on page 353 of the book God's Kingdom of 1,000 Years Has Approached. Here the writer of the book, Frederick Franz, is referring to a convention that was held in 1919, and if you're a Jehovah's Witness and if you've been in the religion for some time, you probably heard of the famous Cedar Point, Ohio convention. In this book, it says this, quote, "It indicated to the world who it was that the returned Lord Jesus Christ had found to be his faithful and discreet slave class. This made the slave class happy." End quote. Again, this also is not true, because at the time of this convention in 1919 at Cedar Point, Ohio, the religion was still teaching that the slave was just one person, Charles Taze Russell. As a matter of fact, they didn't teach that the slave was a class of people until February of 1927, 7.5 years after this convention. So why would he have to lie and say that there was a slave class in 1919? Oh, they're just habitual liars, in my opinion. I don't think they could ever tell the truth about their history, and they don't want to own up to what exactly happened regarding the history of Jehovah's Witnesses. And that's just my personal opinion. But there's a former elder, Leonard Creechan, I'm probably mispronouncing that, but he has a nice quote that I like, and he says, "The Watchtower's greatest enemy is their own literature." Really, all you have to do to fall out of the truth, the Watchtower and Bible Tract Society religion, is to read for yourself what they quote from when it's regarding their own past. And astronomer Carl Sagan made this point, quote, "One prominent American religion confidently predicted that the world would end in 1914. It is astonishing in the face of such transparent evasions that this religion has any adherents at all. The fact that they, the Watchtower Society, can be so shamelessly dishonest, so contemptuous of the intelligence of its adherents, and still flourish, does not speak very well for the tough-mindedness of them." Although he doesn't specifically mention the Jehovah's Witnesses, it's very obvious he's speaking of them when he says that a prominent American religion predicted the end of the world in 1914. And this is how dogmatic they were for even some time after 1914, after C.T. Russell had died. J.F. Rutherford even printed that the world has ended, followed by his infamous slogan, "Millions now living will never die." So really, many Jehovah's Witnesses practice willful blindness because of their need for security that comes from believing the lie, which outweighs their need to know the truth. So they put their hands over their ears and their eyes because the society is like that little blanket that Linus had on Charlie Brown. How he took that blanket with him and it provided a security issue for him. That's how this religion is for many people. So therefore, it actually will not matter if you point out these things to them. So there's another good point here, one of the last points here on this chapter. It's taken from the August 1st, 2001 Watchtower, and it quotes this: "It does not take deliberate lies to develop mistaken beliefs. Often we believe a thing simply because we want to believe it. One professor says that even scientists often fall in love with their own constructions. Their beliefs becloud their critical judgment. They may spend a lifetime in vain trying to shore up mistaken beliefs. So here, the Watchtower is trying to convict others when really they're convicting their own selves. And certainly, the Watchtower and Jehovah's Witnesses have fallen in love with their illusion of God's organization. So if it did not take deliberate lies to develop their illusion, then maybe it doesn't take deliberate lies to uphold that illusion. So this will conclude chapter 12, and please stay tuned for the next chapter. Thank you for taking time to watch and listen to this presentation. Post your comments, like and share this video, subscribe to my channel, and stay tuned for the next episode.